And okay, well, obviously you're Canadian, so it is about a Canadian topic. And what is that movie called?
It's called Summit 72. It's a four-part series. It's available online from the CBC online service called Gem, which is hard to get in the States. But I believe we're getting a deal with Apple TV right now. And Summit 72 commemorates the 50th anniversary last September, of the arguably greatest international hockey series that was ever played. The first time, really, that the very best players in Canada played against the very best players in Russia. So for the longest time, the Russians were winning all the Olympic medals and world championships and that sort of thing, because the Canadians and the few Americans that were there, but the Canadians were not allowed to ice their professional teams, because back in those days, professional athletes weren't allowed to be in the Olympics, in the world championships, and so on. So they finally got it together as a matter of diplomacy, as a matter of settling this argument once and for all. And it turned into this epic good versus evil, capitalism versus communism, right versus wrong kind of political proxy fight over essentially 8 hockey matches. And Canada was supposed to win it quite easily. And they got their butts handed to them in the first few games because they completely underestimated their opponent. And it turned into the event that essentially helped the game of hockey really modernize itself. And also for Canadians to see their country in a much more global light. It's a very parochial place 50 years ago. Now it's a lot different. So it was kind of using hockey as a vehicle for expanding on and understanding really how the country's changed after 50 years.
And what do you mean it was parochial 50 years ago?
Well, it was more parochial in the sense that it was smaller. The population was much, much smaller. It was much more insular. It was far more focused on an economy that was all about extraction and resource management, and not really about value added products and services as much as a modern economy really needs to be. It was still in the throes very much of trying to identify itself as an independent, separate country, not only from Great Britain but from the United States, and trying to manage the whole French and English character of the country. And what is this new entity going to be essentially about? Is it really a new Western liberal democratic independent state, or is it just some sort of a conglomeration of old historical patterns that just have led to a bunch of people kind of living together? So in that way, none of those broader questions of what does it mean to be Canadian they were only starting to be really discussed and fleshed out. And now 50 years later, I don't think we have any perfect answers to any of that stuff, but it's a lot more the debate around it has a lot more detail.
Okay, because I remember I lived in Japan many years ago, and I knew somebody who was from Canada, and she said what was happening. So this is back in the early 90s. She said what was happening at that time was a vertical identity going on. Is that true? Like back in the 90s?
Yeah, very much. In the 90s was the last gasp of what people may remember, something called Quebec separatism, this effort by the province of Quebec to really hive out and carve out itself as a separate country from Canada, had its final, we like to say its final kind of expression in 1995 and the years leading up to 1995, where they had a referendum as to whether they would really separate or not. And so the 90s, especially the early 90s, were fraught with this debate: who are we? What are we? What how French are we? How English are we? Have we got laws and regulations in place to be able to help people be the kind of people however they want to be? What language do they want to live in? What cultural traditions do they want to have? And when you talk about vertical, what was happening to the country was it was really divided previously on a French and English basis. Then it was, by the 80s and 90s, it was far more divided on a rural and urban basis, and kind of a moneyed and non-moneyed kind of class thing, and kind of like what's going on in the United States very much in terms of so many people who feel outside of the growth economic framework of America. That's kind of what was happening continued to happen in Canada. And I would say now that's the real split. It's a rural urban split, and differing perspectives on what the country ought to be because of that.
And then you said before, 50 years ago, it was smaller, but I mean, doesn't it have like not even 30 million people, or what's the population at this point?
Yeah, yeah. Now the population is about 37 million. Back then it was about 15 million, so it's more than doubled. My hometown, Toronto, is a megalopolis as big as Chicago, nearly. In fact, the city of Toronto is, I believe, bigger than the city of Chicago, but the metropolitan area around it is just a little bit smaller. It would be the fourth biggest metropolitan area in the United States if it was in the United States. That's how big it is. And so with that, and with a more global culture and the way media works, and the iconic nature of brands around the world, and a kind of a global economic structure that we're in, I mean, it's the same as everywhere else. I think for a lot of Americans, they would go there and think, it's not. In some ways, it's very much the same as America, and in other ways, it's different. But it's profoundly different, and it's kind of subtly different.
You mean, are you talking about Canada, or are you talking about Toronto?
Both.
Yeah, it's very different because I've been to Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto being the well, I hate to call it the epicenter, but I mean, everything's there. It's where all the money is. It's where all the media is. It's where all the banks are. It's where all sort of the cultural capital of English Canada is there. So that's where the action is, and that's where the power is. So that's where the film festival is, that kind of thing. So, but Canada writ large has a lot of that kind of urbanization going on in Vancouver, in Montreal, Halifax, Calgary. It's rapidly gentrifying, and it's rapidly becoming a much more urban place.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been to Toronto a number of times, and yes, it is massively huge. Unfortunately, I don't know why they destroyed so much of their old architecture. I think that was something in the 50s. They're trying to modernize. What the heck? I mean, they always say Canada's more sophisticated than the US, but they didn't have that foresight.
No, they kind of got into that. They didn't have the sort of the urban renewal piece that was driving it. It was more, I think, development and land and cars, and the supremacy of cars, and how do you get people around an urban landscape. But the funny thing is that when I was a little kid, that whole headspace started to be challenged very sharply. In fact, there was a famous expressway that would take you from sort of northern Toronto and where the main airport is. So just imagine in Chicago going from O'Hare down to downtown, and there was what we have here is the Kennedy Expressway. Well, they were going to do a second one, kind of like another Kennedy Expressway. In fact, same angle, same whole thing, but that was going to cut right through a whole bunch of neighborhoods, and old neighborhoods, and people rose up and stopped it cold at the provincial level, which is the same as the state level, and it gave birth to a whole city renewal philosophy, and an academic rigor around that was personified by a great thinker named Jane Jacobs, who is considered to be, she's I think in her mid-90s now, considered to be one of the greatest thinkers on how cities grow and evolve and how do you make them healthy. She came out of that movement and is still changing cities around the world. So Toronto was at the front end of trying to make sure that a city remains a collection of villages rather than what it was turning into, which is what you talked about, a kind of an urban scape dominated by expressways and cars and no walking ways to villages and shopping and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then when I think of Toronto, also I think of Queen Street that cuts through east-west the entire. I think everybody should. Yeah,
there are a number of those things. Yeah, Queen Street's a great street. I mean, it's very eclectic, very beatnik in certain areas, very kind of it's got a kind of gentrification to it in other parts of the city, and it runs east to west. So yeah, it goes right to the gut of the city, close to the lake. So it's a fun place to go. You'll never run out of things to do, people to see, things to read, and things to eat, and the variety that goes with it if you were to spend some time on Queen Street.
Okay, so obviously when I'm talking to you, you've been in the US for a while, and I notice you're not saying a boat like you did. You avoided saying a boat like Canadians say, but you do have a certain kind of accent with your vowels. Well, you don't sound like Midwestern, like annoying nasal vowels like I have and some other people. But when you came to the US, did you naturally change your accent, or what happened?
I didn't change my accent so much. I figured that language is a evolving thing, and this is what they hired, so this is what you get. I did become a little more sensitive and aware of certain words, especially you mentioned about the three big ones: out, about, and house. Those, and they come up in newscasts all the time. And I always say to the guys and gals here at ABC News, I was like, come on, it's spelled with an OU. That's like got an ow sound. It's not an ah sound. It's not an ass sound. It's not a house. It's a house. But I get it. That's not kind of what the listener here is used to. So over time, like I said, I think my tongue has evolved a little bit. But I just think it's still about clarity. It's always about trying to be clear in your thought, clear in your enunciation, clear in your diction, so that you can communicate and people don't walk away confused and they think that, oh, well, they listened to that guy's newscast, they listened to that person on the radio, and they thought, that was time well spent.
Yeah. And so can you just tell me about your career in Canada, where I'd love to be able to work there in some way sometime. But what was it like? I mean, first of all, is it very, very, very competitive because there aren't many people there?
Oh, it's hugely competitive. They're just the number of, there's many people vying for these positions of authority, and the chance to play journalist as much as there is per capita anywhere else. And the stories are sophisticated. The sense of nationhood and trying to figure that out, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this interview, is still an ongoing issue. Governance is a big issue. Government plays a big role in people's lives, and so therefore governance, who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, criticism around that. It's catnip for journalists, and so there's a lot of focus and a lot of interest in holding people to account, making sure public dollars are spent correctly. A very low tolerance, relatively speaking, for corruption and criminality. And so as a result, it's enormously, a society that doesn't continually tell its stories to itself and try to unmask truths and get towards using the media as a problem solver isn't really going to be moving ahead. And that's one thing that's amazing about Canada, is that there's, maybe sometimes to a fault, there's a willingness to shine a very critical light on power, so that people see power to be exercised correctly, and to ensure that those who don't have power have access to it, and have power be accountable to them. So the media plays an enormous role, and it's very competitive to be a part of that.
Wait, so there's not, if there people question corruption, is there, like, what's the corruption situation compared to, let's say, Chicago? Let's compare Toronto and Chicago. We know how Chicago is, so what's up with Toronto?
Human beings can be corrupt anywhere, right? And I remember one of the reasons, this sort of apocryphal story that I have as to why I'm a journalist, is I'll never forget the Toronto Star when I was a kid. I don't know, I must have been about 12 or 13. They had on the front page of the main newspaper, like the Tribune, they had a long lens shot of a guy who was like a liquor control board officer, liquor license purveyor type of guy, and he was taking a bribe across a picnic table in actually like a brown bag, and it was a sting operation between the police and the media got a hold of it, and they got the long shot, and it was really showing how, on a low level, how in a democratic society, you got to hold people to account. Here was a guy who was cheating, wasn't hurting anyone. There was nothing violent about it. And it was in a park, and there was a park bench, and the guy was kind of old and sympathetic looking, but he was horribly breaking the law and not playing by the rules, and cheating, and just cheating. And I thought to myself, wow, it's beyond being like the referee. You get to be part of holding people to account. It's kind of like how maybe a defense lawyer thinks sometimes. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be involved in those kinds of transactions and that kind of work and that kind of business. And it really struck me. And now my friend is actually the publisher of the Toronto Star. And I told him this story, and he's like, yeah, we got to keep that enterprise part of things going as much as we can, despite the economics of having people on staff and the resources to do those things. But as far as corruption goes, yeah, there's corruption everywhere, and and there will always be corruption, and there will be more of it if the media doesn't do its job, if oversight in government doesn't do its job to ensure that doesn't happen. That's not to say that I have some sort of excessively cynical view of human nature, but without the proper controls in place, corruption will happen. So it happens all the time with who knows, with developers and the sweetheart deals over land that people know is about to be developed by a provincial government for housing stock. And so people speculate on it with insider information, all those kinds of things. That's kind of that's unfair. That's kind of corruption as well. There's sweetheart deals left and right. The prime minister got caught up in something involving a charity with his family, and his family being on the payroll of this charity, and what did the charity really do for poor children? So make no mistake, it's a sophisticated country, and with that sophistication comes the mulings of human nature when it comes to being dishonest. So there's plenty of work to go around.
Wait, and I can't get over that your friend is publisher of the Toronto Star. I mean, when I was in Toronto, I saw the building. I'm like, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah,
that's really impressive. Okay, so basically, if you're in the media up there, do you just basically know everybody, or what's going on with that?
No, I went to school with this guy, and he was always from a very strong business family. So it's more of a business thing for him as opposed to him being a journalist. Jordan Bitto, very good friend, and they rescued this newspaper, which is critical to democratic discourse in Canada, and but was struck by the kinds of financial pressures that the media is in underneath around the world. But in Canada, you talk about a smaller country, you just don't have the revenue streams to support multiple platforms in an age of changing technology the way you might have here. And here everything's under pressure. We're under pressure at ABC News. I mean, Disney's under pressure. We've just announced all kinds of layoffs and stuff like that. People got laid off in this building yesterday. It's brutal. And so everyone's under it, but you feel it a little bit more there. So yeah, I'm very proud of that paper and the folks who have decided that they're going to put some venture capital into it and rescue it.
Well, I want to get into how you got into journalism, but also what I want to know before that is, what did you think of the U.S. when you came here, when you started working here, and did it match like what you thought beforehand?
That's really interesting, because I didn't know what to think. I knew that I could do it. And see, there's a funny thing in the Canadian psyche, right? And it's kind of weird. It's like that big brother, little brother, big sister, little sister kind of sensibility sometimes. And that is that if you are at you're doing really well in your career, you're at the top of your industry, you're doing kind of well, there's always a sense that that you got to go ply your trade in America. And it could be journalism, it can be finance, it can be athletics, it can be academics, whatever it is. You got to go.
Russell Peters.
Yeah, right. Yeah, comedy for sure. Comedy for sure. And you don't have to do it forever, but it kind of becomes a little bit of a mark of a distinction if you go and do it well, and then you come back and maybe you've got a couple of American dollars stuffed in your pockets as a result of it. I mean, it's like 75 cents on the dollar, Canadian dollar to American dollar. So there's always that incentive as well. And so I was always kind of wanting to do that. Plus my dad and mom, they were immigrants to Canada, and they always thought, they didn't always think, but once in a while my father would say, I never finished the true immigrant journey because I didn't really get to the States like so many of his friends. I'm like, Dad, you're a pioneer. You built this other country. It's great. Don't worry about it. So maybe there was a little bit of that. But for me, it's the same game. It's the same intellectual rigor. It requires the same dedication to truth. It requires the same effort on a day-to-day basis to put material out there that is truthful and is correct and is timely and accurate to serve the community. And so I wanted to know if I could earn the trust of people in Chicago to tell their stories. That seems to have happened, thank goodness, touch wood. And but I always wanted to just sort of put myself to the test. So how did I feel about it? It's just like a bigger forum, but it's still the same game.
Well, also you're at a top station. I think you guys are number one in I mean, you guys have been number one for many years in Chicago.
That's right. So, yeah. I mean, I came from a number one station. I came from CTV National News. I wasn't going to go and be part of some sort of startup in that regard either. But I knew about ABC News in Chicago and its local reputation, certainly. But sort of the ABC Eyewitness News brand and these programs that are in the big markets in America. There are 8 owned televisions by ABC News in the big markets like New York, LA, San Francisco, Houston, Philly, us, you name it. And they're all number one, and they've all been number one for 30 years or so. And I'm very proud to be a part of that. And one of the reasons they're number one, it's not just that they hire good people and stuff like that, but despite fiscal pressures, they continually invest in the news gathering business. So what does that mean? That means, like, good people, smart people, cameras, trucks, good equipment, good editing equipment, this iPhone, that kind of thing. There's always enough money for making investments in the news gathering process. Not to say that there isn't all kinds of downward pressure to make this as efficient as possible, save money, make sure that Disney makes its money, for sure. But there is that commitment to the product, and the way like the way it works in this business nowadays. I mean, there are ways to do news in a much cheaper fashion, and you can do a ton of news right on your phone. This is 1040p video. You turn it sideways, you can edit it on your phone, and bang, you got yourself a 1:40 package that you can do your own stand-ups. In fact, I did a little bit of that during the pandemic, especially. But this place continues to invest in the people and the resources required to do storytelling the right way, and that's why it's number one. And I just get to ride herd on that a little bit. 30 people need to do their job perfectly before I can hope to screw it up. So I'm pretty aware and grateful for that.
Yeah, that's true, because I think people who work in the media, I mean, I work in the media, but people who work in it, they understand that you do need the resources. You need the people doing, being diligent. You need the equipment. You need to be out on the street. You need a lot of things to report successfully. And I know people working in places where resources have been cut or misallocated, that can affect it. So, I mean, we've all experienced that. But okay, so yeah.
I just add the number one piece though to that is the people. And I will be perfectly honest that this place pays to get the best people. So I don't know how many times I'm out on the street and people will say, oh, I heard there's an opening at Channel 7 for this or that, a reporter job, a digital editor job. They pay that little extra to get that person who's that much more motivated, and it pays off all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I think respect too. It's a pay and the respect, because in some places they can't pay as well, but if you're respected and your boss is good, I mean, like right now I have an excellent boss. It's a great experience. So
yeah, because we spend all our waking hours together, so might as well be a good experience. I'm not here to waste. You only get one life, right? You don't want to waste it you don't want to waste it, and being with the wrong people would be kind of wasting it. But yeah, it's good. It's good to be here.
that's great. And then, okay, so how did you get into media?
Well, that's good. I kind of came at it from a much more non-traditional way. I didn't go to journalism school. I went to a fairly well-known Canadian school in London, Ontario, called the University of Western Ontario, one of the top schools in Canada. I got a degree in political science and with a minor in economics and French. And I was very involved in public affairs and electoral politics and kind of that line between academics and the electoral side of things. So, a little over 25, 30 years ago, that's kind of what I was involved in. And then I was involved in a couple of campaigns in Canada, and I just saw, I just continued to see evidence that the real power, as much as it is in people who are politicians, elected people who are senior bureaucrats, the power of how to move a society relies in the story. And so who tells the story and how the story is told is as much a function of the power dynamic as anything else. And I just was always attracted to that. We have a few journalists in the family. My grandfather was a nationally pensioned novelist in India. So there's that tradition as well. And so I just said, I could do this. I'm a good writer. I'm a good presenter. I'm interested. I'm curious about other people, which is the most important thing. And so I ended up getting over 20 years ago, I got a job as a researcher with the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, in Calgary, Alberta, like Western Canada, from where I was. And I took a 13-week contract at really, low wage to just start to learn how to be, a chase producer, getting guests for an all news station, and then branching out from there into producing, and then into reporting. And I was on the air, what, Christmas of 1996, doing midnight overnights from Toronto on a shift that nobody wanted. And so what happened was I just kept continuing to build my resume and taking every opportunity I could, going wherever I could. I moved all over the place. I took weird hours. So I moved from Toronto to Calgary to Halifax, then Vancouver, then back to the national newscast in Toronto, and then Chicago. So you got to take your opportunities where they are.
But was your goal to get on the air?
Yeah.
Okay. And actually, I love the accent in Calgary. So if anybody can meet people from there, listen to how they speak, I like it. But it's so different from American accent. But okay, so you did, yeah.
Call it Canada's Texas, by the way.
Okay, that makes sense. But okay, so your goal was to get on the air. So did you feel like it was going to be difficult, or how did so it was the key to getting these odd shifts and so forth?
Yeah, it was. And it was also about, wanting it and seeking out the opportunities structurally in the various places that I was to seek those opportunities and ask for them and keep asking when people would say no. And then when you did get an opportunity to do, I don't know, like a profile on a politician, or do a 2-minute business news update or something like that, you do it, and you do it to the best of your ability, and you just keep on going and keep asking. And in this business, I have learned, and for any young people who are watching this, what you have to do if you want to be successful, other than, the obvious things about being talented, work hard, read widely, be curious about other people, you have to have a pretty good view of what you want, and you have to ask for it. And then you have to go to where you can do what it is that you want. And if you get stuck in a sort of a parallel track, but you're in the city that you want to be in, or you're near your parents, or you're worried about money, or all those other things, especially at the early years, those are not the things to worry about. If what it is that you want some years down the road is kind of what we're doing. So that, having that, I don't know where that farsightedness in myself came from, other than to know that I was coming at it from a different angle, and there were going to be no shortcuts, and I just had to work literally twice as hard as anybody else and want it twice as much. And that's what I did.
Okay. Why did you have to work twice as hard as everybody else?
Well, lots of reasons. Like I said, I didn't go to journalism school. I was already working in a different industry, though it was related. I didn't have the typical background that people had, and I didn't know some baseline stuff about storytelling and how you put together a story. How do you interview someone? I didn't know some of the real trade stuff that you can learn. It's a craft, just like anything else, and you can learn it over time. I had to know what I didn't know, and I'm not going to put too fine a point on it, but 25 years ago, guys like me, there weren't a lot of guys like me. There just weren't. And my intention 100% was to be the number one guy, and to be right up in front, not because of any, not for any other reason other than you were the best person to tell the story. And that was, you talk about things that are hard. I'm sure at some point along the way that maybe hurt a few people along the way. And you talk about competition, there's enormous amounts of competition for that when you're in your 20s and 30s and stuff like that. And so I had to kind of break through some of those barriers, and I felt many, many times that I kind of wasn't breaking through because there were things that were kind of against me that I had no control over. And now it's interesting, 25 years later, you start to see the world starting to look on television, on radio, more accurately reflecting the society that's out there. Not that everybody has to be a minority or a woman or some version thereof, but it's got to be a proper mix. And we're still not there, but I'm doing my little part, I think.
Yeah, because especially in a city, I mean, I live downtown, Chicago, and I walk outside and immediately I see several different kinds of people, and I hear at least 3 languages on the street. So It's cool when the media actually reflects that.
Yeah. And the next step is going to be really taking that sense of diversity and equity and inclusion and taking it even to the next step. I mean, I like to say, back in Canada, I used to like to say I'm as Canadian as hockey sticks and as Indian as Nehru shirts. I used to say that all the time. It's such a dorky thing to say, but anyway, I had to really play those two things differently. Now that you're seeing it on the BBC, maybe you see it in other news services as well. But we need to see even more diversity. We need to see women wearing hijab. We need to see guys with beards, and turbans. We need to see white people that look like, I don't know, the average white person from Iowa, and have that just be, part of this grand human family that is helping to present the news to people. I think we need to have that, so that we truly do get to a point where we're not, surprised that somebody who looks kind of different from me today is actually talking about the things that are important to me now.
But the thing is, I mean, you and I think we're a similar age, but the thing is, back then, there wasn't much internet, and now, we've got internet and apps. So do you think that fills the gap?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that, I'm sorry, but I still think TV is the king. And let's face it. Look, when things start going down, people tune into TV. I know it, and we feel it. We see it in our ratings, whether it's bad weather or disaster or terrorism or something completely out of the ordinary. Yesterday, we had a horrible industrial accident in Lamont. Yes, of course, people get their information from a variety of sources, but this notion that somehow appointment television is gone for news, or that trusted voices on something as kind of anodyne as linear television is over, is not the fashion. That's not true at all. It's still about TV, and because TV brings you the immediacy, it is everywhere, it is reliable, it doesn't cost much, and you don't have to worry about internet connections and things like that. These things may change, and they are changing over time, but it still seems to me that for so many people, that if they haven't seen it on television, then I don't know, it didn't happen, and therefore television news still plays a big role in that.
But the thing is, I think that, younger people, they'll say, or people will say about younger people, they don't really watch TV. They're more into digital. And that's one of the reasons why, I mean, you're at a very good station and an excellent company. Everybody says great things about Disney, but I think when, you see the cuts that are made, like in smaller markets.
Yeah.
Because I was in St. Louis at a CBS TV station, and this guy said this room used to be full of workers and now it's not. So what about that aspect?
Well, that's also a function of the basics of the cost of producing, right? And technology's impact. I mean, our control room used to have 7 or 8 people in the control room to put on a newscast. Now it's 2. That's technology as much as anything else. That's a business doing things more efficiently to bring more money to the bottom line. That's one thing. But as far as the actual emission of the product, yeah, you know what? Newsrooms have been chasing 18 to 29-year-olds forever, since we were 18 and 29 years old. And yeah, I don't think we watch news as much. I mean, I did because I was a nerd, but other people, we just didn't. But when people move into these different stages in life and they become more affluent, and that's kind of the way things are, they move into these moments, these old patterns tend to repeat themselves again. I will say that it's stretched out a little bit more. I'm learning, my kids are in their late teens and early 20s, and my wife and I were just saying the other day that the things that we did in our 20s and our expectations, especially for our late 20s, are going to be the things that they do in their mid to late 30s, and everything's just getting stretched out. It's a function of longevity, technology, COVID, and a whole bunch of other things. But that's kind of the way, that's just society in a certain way kind of evolving, and that's where we are. So that being said, they're going to move into those stages where, yeah, you know what, they're going to be coming home from work and they're going to flick on the tube for a half hour while they're having a cup of tea or maybe having a beer or getting dinner ready or what have you, and they're going to watch the news. Our numbers are still there. They're not what they were in the 90s or even the early 2000s, but they're still there, and we have a deep obligation to them, because we know that the stickiness of our stories and the stickiness of our news in terms of their understanding of their world is as good as ever.
Okay, now speaking of stickiness, do you mind if I play the infamous video of
No,
your early days in Chicago?
I'd rather you didn't.
Okay. But anyway, okay, so because you're known because early on in your career, something happened when you were on the air. So I'll link to it later. But
Yeah,
um
I'd rather you didn't because it's just one of those dumb things. I mean, look, I won an Emmy Award. We held it together,
that was
and
good, yeah.
it was scary. It was life and death, so it's not like it was some sort of joke. And it was you know it was it was just such a shock that what we're talking about, of course, is a car crashing through the State Street studio, which is right below where I'm sitting right now. And it's it's one of those things you don't want that to be the only thing that you're known for. I've won 9 Emmys since then. I'm a primetime news anchor for ABC7. I prefer that people kind of look at the bigger thing, but you're a storyteller, and I submitted to this, so you do what
Well,
you
no,
do.
I was gonna say that what was incredible is you kept it together. And I think that was very noble because I've seen people not keep it together for very minor situations like, oh, it's raining or something's happening and they can't, remain serious or so it was good. Anyway, but that was
Well,
early on in your career here. You must have been like, welcome to Chicago.
yeah, it was like a year in, and it was. I'll tell you one story about it that was really weird. Was that it was 2 nights before Christmas. Um, a lot of people were shopping on State Street, and I think it was a Friday night, and um, there were a lot of people that are in front of that window in front of our station, and there was some weirdness that was going on outside. Like you could tell cars were whipping around and guys were doing like donuts and kind of doing circles and things like that. But it was also extraordinarily cold that night. It was very, very cold. And thank goodness, because it was cold, there weren't as many people in front of that window as there normally would be with holiday shoppers and Chris Kindle Market and all that stuff just down the street. And so there was like an opening. The guy's just doing these turns and turns, and then all of a sudden, wham! It goes like right in like that. And just like my hand is going right at the camera, it was just like right at me. And I was like looking right at it and just thinking, holy moly. And then the thing is the glass exploded because it's safety glass, and it exploded. And then the car's in there, and then there was this incredible aroma smell of, what a car smells like in the winter, the exhaust from the winter when it's really cold outside and it's snowy. All that air and that smoke and that atmosphere came into the studio immediately, and then it was incredibly cold in the studio because it was cold outside. So it was really, it was really, really jarring and traumatic at a certain level. But yeah, I guess we held it together and we won an Emmy.
Yeah, and also because you just were surprised for a second and then you threw it to a reporter and then you guys flipped the whole newscast to talk about what was going on, and it was extremely professional, and I thought because it's ABC7 because they do a good job. So but
My,
okay.
my worry also, just one last thing, was like the guy was still sitting in the truck. The guy was, as it turns out, he was mentally unstable. He was kind of, I don't know if he was off his meds or what have you. And he was still in the truck. He was still in the van. And I'm waiting for him to come out with a gun or something horrible like that. And I'm just keeping my eyes open going, okay, what's next here? What's about to happen? I'm now in the middle of the story. Let's just calm this whole thing down. And yeah, I guess we did calm it down. And that was then. We've done some good things
I
since
know.
then.
Yeah, it's just funny. So, okay, so back to young people getting into the business, because what I've noticed about TV, okay, I don't work in TV, but now I work for a TV company. I work in radio, but what I've noticed is, okay, there are a lot of jobs in small markets. And that's what I'm always telling, because I teach also, I always tell the students to go for it. But the pay is extremely bad. It's like really hard to live on. So what
Yeah.
advice for people, what advice do you have for people who have to live like away from their families, they can't live at home, etc.?
Well, I think I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think you have to do it. You do have to do it. You have to take the sacrifice. Sometimes you have to sacrifice for your art and your craft. You can make do, and you will. What you learn, what exposure you get, the ability to go and talk to the mayor of a small town, the ability to have personal relationships with business people who are struggling to make ends meet themselves wherever they are. That is the guts of good journalism. That is how you learn the craft. You have the ability to walk up. You're some kid from suburban Chicago, and here the heck you are living in a suburb of Omaha, Nebraska, and you think you've got nothing in common with the people that you're talking to, but in fact you do. And that's how you have to find it, and you have to ask the questions, and you have to be empathetic, and you have to have a smile on your face, and you have to be able to make friends and build trust. And when you do all those things, and you don't have to do it forever, you're not going to be doing it for 5 years. You're going to move from a year to 18 months, a year to 18 months, and then you'll know about the business, and you'll know where you stand, and you'll know whether you've got the goods to make it to Chicago or wherever it is that you want to make it, or you won't, and you'll still be better for that experience. It is not about the money at the early stages. It's about the experience, and you have to do it. And if you do it with sincerity and integrity, with a sense that it's kind of like basic training, and you treat these people with respect, no matter where they are, no matter what their politics are, you'll get so much out of it, and you'll be so much better for it, and you'll be a better journalist for it.
Because also what I noticed is that people who are in the older generation, they just did like anchor or reporter or writer or whatever. It was all segmented. And now the jobs are MMJ, multimedia journalist. And so they have to people have to do a lot more. And sometimes they don't even have a camera person. I'm sure you've heard about these incidents where somebody doesn't have a camera person with them, and then they're injured in some way, or, it's sort of dangerous in some situations. So what about people? How do they get through that?
Get through it. They have to get through it. I mean, I think those are unfortunately more common stories than not, but they're not apocryphal in the sense that these are some of the hazards you got to deal with. I mean, you want to be a firefighter, you might get injured. You want to be a cop, you might get injured. You want to be a journalist, you might be in an uncomfortable spot. You want to be a finance guy for a bank, you might be bored out of your mind sitting in a cubicle. I mean, there are hazards everywhere, and you just have to wonder. You have to ask yourself about this business and about this calling, this craft, if you have the guts of what it takes, because it's easy to go for it when you're getting all the obvious benefits and accoutrement that comes with it, but you're only getting that because you're embodying what it's really supposed to be all about. At least that's the way I hope. And as far as how it was structured before, where people were in certain lines, producer, announcer, that kind of thing, that you're right. That's pretty much all gone. And that's a function of technology and efficiency. But the fact is, I think it makes for better professionals in the newsroom as a result.
Yeah, because they learn different skills. Now, let's say somebody does not get a break for some reason. What advice do you have for people if they can't get that TV job? Or let's say they want to be on the air, like you want to be on the air, but they're not able to get in front of the camera. What should they do?
Well, they have to ask themselves why that's happening. They have to be honest with themselves as to what are the skills that they're working on that should get them there. If they really want it, they should be able to get it. And if they're not getting it where they want to get it, then they have to move. Then they have to go somewhere else. It could be, who knows, personality clash with a news director. It could be something like somebody just doesn't like you. They don't like the way you look, as sad as that may be. There may be racism involved. There may be sexism involved. There may be just, I've got one opportunity, I'm giving it to that person over there. Who knows what it is? But you have to just be nimble enough that you go to where you're going to get the opportunity that you need to have. And then you can go, you can learn, you can make mistakes, you can be confident in that regard, and you will get the benefit of the experience that will then propel you into your next experience. So the key is, if you want it, you can't get discouraged at the earlier stages, and you just got to keep wanting it and keep improving.
Yeah, because there's this pattern that I noticed with some people is, okay, first of all, we know the business is tough, but then, you have to love what you do despite the business. And then some people just face some obstacles and they think, I can't take this anymore, and they just get out of it. So it's not that they've been in it for many years.
Yeah. Well, people quit medical school. People quit.
Right.
These are the things. Sometimes, our life pattern isn't necessarily a straight line from here to there going up all the way. Sometimes it's like that. In fact, most of the time it's like that. And my advice is to you. One thing that I seem to have done okay in my life was ask myself some really tough questions at fairly young ages, and keep asking those questions about whether this is what I wanted to do. Was it going the right way? What do I need to learn? what's the checklist look like, and where am I missing things? Because I was pretty convinced I wanted the end goal. And when you have that kind of idea, that end goal, and you kind of can work backwards, it makes anything actually a little bit easier in one sense. At least you know where you're going. So that's just, I think that those are personality issues, those are character issues. And they're not like that, quitting something is a lack of character. It's not for everybody. And there are a lot of very successful people who've had a 5-year career in journalism, broadcast journalism, or what have you. It's a funny thing. It's one of those jobs, my job especially, it's one of those jobs that everybody thinks that they can do. Like, they see it and they think, oh, I could do that. Oh, that looks kind of good. Those guys get paid pretty well, and those gals look like they're having a good time, and blah, blah, blah. So they think they have a right to do it. And they forget about the work. They say that about when they see a doctor on television, or or any other number of sort of high profile professions. But with this, they tend to. So there's that kind of prejudice in your own mind that you kind of have to deal with. And you just have to ask yourself, there's all kinds of benefits for doing this work, even for 3-5 years, that can take you into any range of a number of other businesses, and not just on the communication side, but just strategy and understanding how politics works, and public policy, and getting involved in government, getting involved on the bureaucratic side. There are a lot of people whose first 5 years working, in radio or something like that is what helped define why they're so smart now.
Yeah, and also, so what do you think makes a good anchor? Because you only do anchoring now. You don't do reporting?
No, I report.
You also report. Okay. So reporter. Well, what about, like, what's the difference and what makes a good anchor versus reporter?
Well, I think they're the same. That you have to be completely free and clear of conflicts. You have to be a good communicator in terms of how you speak, how well read you are, how interested you are in the other person, and it says journalism 101 around those kinds of issues. But I think in terms of what makes a good anchor, I think trust is the number one issue. Like, do people trust what I'm saying? That's the lingua franca. It's not the fancy suits. It's not the lights and the graphics. Although those are all fun things that are part of the presentation. But in the end, they look at the TV and say, do I trust that guy? And if I do, why? And so that's something that you build up over time. This is one of those great businesses, though, that the longer you do it, and if you do it right, the more equity you have in the business, and the more equity you have with the client, the customer, the viewer, the more likely they are to come back to you the next time, and the next time, and the next time. So that's kind of, you're constantly building something, I think. And I think that your credibility and integrity are on the line every day in terms of how you approach a story, how you do a story, how you tell something, do it the right way. And once you have kind of a reputation for that track record, then good things start to happen. And I think the same thing applies for reporting. Reporting also, as much as anchoring, but even more so, requires a lot of curiosity, a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of work developing sources. It requires tremendous amounts of personal energy. You have to be able to meld your personal life, I think, your personal life into your professional life. That's the way I live it. There tends to be not as much of a distinction between the two. It's not like I leave the office and forget about everything. Not that I go home and just watch news all the time, but my kids are always bugging. All I do is like, oh, Dad, you're driving home. Can you stop listening to the news? Just whatever. So I think there has to be that kind of commitment. And anyone in any high-end profession has that kind of commitment. A doctor is a doctor 24 hours a day. A lawyer and a politician, a business person, a CEO, an entrepreneur, they're doing this stuff all the time. And so that's what makes you good at it, because then you're on top of it.
But then, okay, well, I got to go teach English soon.
Yeah.
I teach English to immigrants, but on the South Side. But anyway, so when you do reporting, okay, how do you put together a story? Because I've seen the raw video that TV stations have. Like, they might have 15 minutes of raw video. And how do you make a 2-minute story out of that?
That's the secret sauce, right? You got to boil it down. You got to figure out what's the story, what's the focus, who are the principals that you need to talk to, where's the real answer in all this, what's the video that you that you were able to obtain that illustrates it in television. It's you got to write to your pictures. That's number one. Many people continually make that mistake. But what am I seeing here? And just describe what I'm seeing. It's just journalism 101. It's Edward R. Murrow's what he did standing on the U.S. Embassy rooftop in Germany in World War II. He's just standing there and telling people what he saw. And if you do that with integrity, and you do that with technology using the video that you get, you work well with editors, and you boil things down, and you always can say it in less time. You can always make your sound bites shorter, as long as you stick to integrity. The context is accurate, and you're getting at some semblance of the truth, whatever the truth is. Like what caused that explosion yesterday in Lamont, or what's going on with Joe Biden's re-election campaign. However you perceive what is the pursuit of truth around a question, I think is a great way to frame how you're going to get inside the story and try to tell it in a way that makes an average person go, "Hey, I'm going to listen to this guy."
Okay, but how would you define integrity?
I think that it's just simply about what do you think is the truth? I mean, you got to be well read enough to have a sense of what the truth about a certain circumstance is. Is somebody lying here or not? What is the issue that's at play here? You've got to do a little homework, and you just play it straight. And integrity means, as well, doing the story as well as you can, and taking an extra 5 minutes to make sure that that sentence is just right, and it's just really describing that picture the way you want it to, and it leads in effortlessly into the next soundbite or what have you. Taking time with that craft to the extent you can, because we're all under deadline pressure, and doing like what I say to my kids, just what, anything that you do is worth your best effort. That's integrity. And if you do it like that on a day-to-day basis, you'll probably be pretty successful.
Okay. And then anything else?
No, I just, listen, Chicago's, I tell you one thing, people say, why'd you leave such a great job and come here and switch countries and all that? And I'll tell you, if you're a news junkie, coming to Chicago is it's like a thirsty person drinking out of a fire hose. It is totally exciting and totally fun, and it means a lot. So it makes you think like your time is well spent.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of stuff happening that's off the record. I mean,
yeah.
Just so much stuff I find out, I'm like, this could never get out, or if it did get out, people would get in trouble. But okay, and then are you bilingual in French and English?
I wouldn't, by Canadian standards, I wouldn't say yes, but I'm obviously functionally bilingual in the sense that I can get my point across. I can understand it very well. I can read it very, very well. And, I won't go hungry if I was in a French milieu. I could find a bathroom.
And then do you speak an Indian dialect? Because you said your parents were immigrants.
I don't, but I understand one language called Kannada from the state of Karnataka in India, where Bangalore, southwest side. I understand that, like the back of my hand. And then there's another language nearby, Marathi, from the state where Mumbai is, Maharashtra. And these are big, big places. And so I understand the reason. I understand that one a little bit, but the first one I understand very much more. So yeah, we grew up with my parents could speak 3 or 4 languages. It was pretty cool that way. And then we had the whole French thing thrown at us. My one regret, though, to be honest with you, is I wish I did speak French that much better, and I'm determined that my kids get that.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say that I never went to South Asia. I lived in Asia for 4 years, but I never went to South Asia, but Asia changed my life. I tell whenever I meet anybody, immigrant from Asia, I say that because it really did. So, because I came back in the early 90s, and it's like, I feel like I still came back yesterday. I saw so much incredible stuff, so many different kinds of people, different ways of life. I still read about.
How did it change you?
Oh, many ways. I can write a whole thing about just like my view of the world, my view of God, my view of myself, my what's like I became like what basically when somebody lives abroad, I'm sure your parents say this too. You like what you like and you don't like what you don't like, and it has nothing to do with your culture. And just also back then, Asia was going through this incredible change, industrialization basically, and there are just so many cultures. I mean, just like even in Malaysia, there's so many Indian people who've been there for years and generations. And just, I mean, it's to the point where I got some gas in the western suburbs, and this guy who's from Pakistan, he said, "Are you from here?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Because you don't seem like it." Because it's like it just changed me as a person, like more international. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of information about Asia, and it
Right.
was just mind blowing. And I, I just would never. I did not come back the same person, and just had an incredible positive effect. So I feel
Right.
like this connection, even though I'm not Asian at all, and I'm not married to somebody who's Asian, but
The travel has that effect, and you know what? That effect is the effect that a young journalist will have on a young journalist going and living in a small place that they otherwise wouldn't live in. That's the same effect.
that's true. Okay, well, thanks. And I'm going to go teach some immigrants English, but I really appreciate you doing this because it's very hard to get TV people, even people I've met. It is, I don't know why. So you're very gracious to let me do
Oh,
this.
it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much, and I look forward to the link. And thank you very much for your interest too.
All right, thanks. All right, take care. Have fun today.